So in reading today, the first thing that you were to do is to complete the page on problem and solution and on chronological order from last week. So you should have completed this problem and solution page, front and the back of the problem and solution page, and then the chronological order page, which is front here and back here. So both of those pages should be completed, and they will be 2 grades. One for problem and solution and one for chronological order. Then, this week, that's what we did last week, was problem and solution chronological order. This week, we're working on 2 other text structures. You already have this in your notebook from last week, but we're going to work on compare and contrast and cause and effect. You should be familiar because we have compared and contrast characters before, and we have talked about cause and effect before. Compare and contrast is how you tell how things are alike or different. Cause and effect is an event and what causes that event to happen. So here you have an explanation of the 2 text structures, clue words for them, and a visual representation. We will not go over descriptive in our ELA workbook pages, but you should know that description is like when you're using a lot of adjectives and you're using vivid language to paint a good picture in the reader's mind. But the 4 that we're going to focus on are chronological order, problem and solution, which we did last week, and then compare and contrast and cause and effect. So in our ELA notebook, in our iReady workbook, we're going to do page 218 to 221 and also 226 together. So we're going to start on page 218. It says, how is a house different from a skyscraper? They each have a different structure and purpose. Authors use different text structures for specific purposes too. The purpose of cause and effect text structure is to tell about events and explain why they happen. Words and phrases like cause, effect, because, and as a result are sometimes used in a cause-effect structure. The purpose of a compare-contrast text structure is to describe how 2 or more things are similar and different. A compare-contrast text structure will frequently use words like both, unlike, similarly, and in contrast. Comparing text can help you see their structures and purposes. Read the passages below. Look for evidence of text structure and the purposes of each one. So we're going to be looking for these keywords for cause and effect or for compare and contrast, and see if we can determine the text structure of passage 1 and passage 2. So passage 1. Octopuses and squids have ink sacs. When threatened, they defend themselves by shooting a thick cloud of dark ink into the water. Because the ink is thick and dark, it hides octopuses and squids from their attackers. As a result, octopuses and squids have time to escape. All right, so let's talk about passage 1 on page 219. What was the purpose of passage 1? What was the text structure? And what was its evidence? So before we read passage 2, we're going to go ahead and fill out the chart on page 219 on passage 1. So it told us why octopus and squids use their ink. It told us they use them to defend themselves. It used the word because in there, which because was a key word for cause and effect text structure. And it was a cause and effect text structure. So the purpose was to tell how octopuses and squids defend themselves. It was cause and effect. Because was our text evidence, because the ink is thick and dark. Also, I didn't catch this one, but it says as a result in the last sentence. As a result, octopuses and squids have time to escape. So that was our evidence for choosing cause and effect. Moving on to passage 2. Octopuses and squids live in salt water. Both have blue blood, hard beaks, and 8 arms lined with suckers. Octopuses live in dens on the ocean floor where they hunt for clams, lobsters, and crabs. In contrast, squids live in the open ocean and eat fish and shrimp. So what was the purpose, the text structure, and evidence for passage 2? I heard the word in contrast. I heard both. So the purpose was to tell us about similarities and differences of octopuses and squids. The text structure should have been cause and effect, and we picked out those key words. So to describe how octopuses and squids are alike and different, it was compare-contrast. It used the word both, have blue blood, hard beaks, and 8 arms lined with suckers. In contrast, squids live in open ocean and eat fish and shrimp. So it told us how they were alike, and it told us how they were different. The closed reader habit at the bottom of the page says when you reread the articles, underline details that tell what each passage is about, and circle words and phrases that suggest the text structure. So we're underlining what it's about, circling words or phrases that suggest the structure. So we're just going to focus on the first passage. Why are the oceans salty? We're going to do one passage at a time. For much of history, it was a mystery why the oceans were salty. Different cultures, assuming that the ocean began as fresh water and only later became salty, came up with their own explanations. The Vikings related a story of a sailor dropping a magical salt grinder to the bottom of the ocean. People in the Philippines told of a giant who carried sacks of salt from island to island, but then accidentally dropped them all into the sea. Other cultures had similar stories to explain the cause of the ocean's saltiness. Scientists eventually figured out the truth. The stories were correct in one way. The amount of salt in the ocean has increased over time. Where did all the new salt come from? From the land. Most rocks contain salts, and over millions of years, the forces of wind, rain, and ice break down the rocks and release the salts. Rainfall carries the salts to rivers, and the rivers carry the salts into the ocean. As a result, the ocean is salty. So you should have underlined what the passage was about. It was about why the oceans are salty. Scientists figured out the truth why the oceans were salty. Millions of years, forces of wind, rain, and ice break down the rocks and release the salt into the sea. You should have circled evidence that says what text structure it is. So, mystery, explanations, explain the cause, figured out, as a result. Those are things you should have circled. So if we look at the chart on page 221, the author's purpose of why are the oceans salty is to tell us why the oceans are salty. The text structure was cause and effect. The evidence of our text structure are those words that we circled. Mystery why. Explanation. To explain the cause. As a result, the ocean is salty. Those are all the things that we circled. All right, now we're going to read oceans and seas. We're going to use our same strategy of underlining what it's about and circling key words or phrases that let us know what the text structure is. Some people use the words ocean and sea interchangeably, but these words refer to different things. An ocean is an enormous body of salt water, such as the Pacific or the Atlantic. In contrast, a sea is a smaller body of salt water, such as the Mediterranean Sea between Africa and Europe. Oceans are so large that people view them as surrounding the continents. The opposite is true for seas. They are surrounded by other larger geographic features. Some seas are entirely encircled by ocean. The Sargasso Sea in northern Atlantic is an example of this. Other seas, such as the Hudson Bay in Canada, are enclosed on some sides by ocean and other sides by land. Finally, a few seas, such as the Caspian in Asia, are completely landlocked within continents. Despite the differences, however, all seas have two things in common. They are made of salt water and they are smaller than the oceans. So you should have underlined what this passage was about. It was about oceans, what they were, an enormous body of salt water. A sea, what it was, smaller body of salt water. And they're made of salt water, and they are smaller oceans. Those are the things you should have underlined. Keywords that tell us what the text structure is: but, different, in contrast, opposite, some, other, a few, two things in common. You might not have gotten all those, but I bet you got a few of them. Now our chart on page 221 for oceans and seas. The author's purpose was to tell us the similarities and differences between oceans and seas, and between types of seas. It was compare and contrast text structure. And the evidence of that text structure were the things that we circled. But these words refer to different things. In contrast, a sea is a smaller body of water. The opposite is true for seas. And two things in common. Telling how two things are in common are comparing those things. Telling how they contrast is telling how those things are different. Now you're going to flip over to page 226. On page 226, we have our open-ended response. Explain how the text structure of each passage supports each author's purpose for writing. Use text evidence to support your response. Here's our hint. Be sure to quote and phrase from each passage as evidence of its text structure. So we want to use quotes or phrases from the text to prove what text structure it has. Here is a sample answer. Yours could be the same thing, or it could be something similar. Why are oceans salty? That was the first one we read. The author uses cause and effect text structure to explain why the oceans are salty. She uses words and phrases such as why, explanations, and as a result. Those are all things that we circled in that passage. She also poses questions and answers them. In Oceans and Seas, that was the second passage we read, the author uses a compare-contrast structure to make clear similarities and differences between the oceans and seas. He uses words and phrases such as but, different, opposite, and in contrast to compare oceans to seas. He also compares the different types of seas by using words and phrases some, other, a few, and two things in common. Again, all of these things in quotes are things that we circled in our passage. Please email me if you have any questions on those workbook pages. You also need to glue down your next word study, which is Word Study Unit 10. This is Word Study Unit 10. Our suffixes are ty and ity. These suffixes change adjectives into nouns. When you take royal and you add ty to it, royalty, now it's a noun. When you take tranquil and you add ity to it, you have tranquility. Now it's a noun. So you need to glue this down and make sure you complete 4 word study activities this week in your word study notebook with the suffixes ty and ity.